What do you do when you've poured everything you have into something only to have it either come crashing down or find out that it's cost you more than you really wanted to sacrifice in other areas of your life? Today's guest, Hank Avink, talks about how that's happened in his life and the steps that he's instituted to course correct, to institute principles to help him keep his priorities where they should be and keep his integrity intact.
At one point during that, I almost put a bullet in my mouth, literally had a gun in my hand. Also, by the age of 22, we had 42 doors. By the age of 25, I was bankrupt. It was at that moment I drew a line in the sand and I said, the next time I get punched in the jaw, I'm not going to have to worry about money. And
there's some powerful lessons in here with really practical application to help you overcome.
I remember sitting on her guest bedroom bed and she said, if you think I'm with you because of your money, you don't know me. And she...
All right, well, Hank, thanks for coming on today. Today we're here to talk about you, your experiences, a lot of the things that you've overcome in life. Lead us into a little bit of what your background is.
We'll go back to 1998, won a national championship playing hockey at 5'10", 160 pounds, soaking wet as a tough guy. I scored 3 goals in 3 years, and I was knocked out of the first game of the national championship, so I received the trophy in street clothes. When we were flying back, my coach, when I put my bag over my shoulder, he goes, I guess you didn't need that. It's not what you tell a 19-year-old that is dealing with concussions and, you can't see it. It was at that moment that I said, I'm out of here. And I bought my first rental property. I put $1,000 into an LLC with my father. By the age of 22, we had 42 doors. By the age of 25, I was bankrupt. I met my wife right while I was going bankrupt. She looked like everything was going great, living on a lake. Meanwhile, my whole world was falling apart. At one point during that, I almost put a bullet in my mouth, literally had a gun in my hand, and was ready to die. Fast forward, doing well. Our second kid is born. Find out 6 days later, he has to have open heart surgery, and everything that I thought was important in life ceased to be important. I ended up taking a job where I had 600 flights in 3 years, traveling all over the country, and then left that and started over. And in each one of those instances of starting over, it's become a math equation. For those of you listening on my forum, I have math versus drama. And myself, like many others, have been through a lot of stuff. And you get to choose if you're going to be a victim, if you're going to be angry, or if you can be at responsibility. And thankfully, through most of it, I was at the level of responsibility. Therefore, I didn't take my life. I didn't get a divorce because it didn't make marriage easy during those years. And, where we find ourselves right now is we're in a pretty good place. Nothing's perfect, but years and years and years of working at it, we put ourselves in a pretty good place.
So let's talk about that work. You collapsed time there with about a 26-year span. And so a lot happened in there, starting off with the hockey, not exactly a strong confidence builder when you get a compliment like that.
Yeah. And I feel bad. He didn't mean it that way, but sometimes you hear something the way that you needed to hear it. And it was the exact kick in the butt that I needed.
Which speaks to our mindset of how we receive things, even whether it is meant backhanded or whether it's not. Am I receptive to what I can learn even from the bad comments? Nobody wants to listen to that. Most of us don't seek out criticism, which I think you and I could both argue is the downfall of many individuals and organizations, that they can't take feedback. They get into the echo chamber of you're so great, you're so wonderful. When in fact, maybe you're not. Hearing that you're not hits reset if you're willing to let it.
Therapy's helped me with that a lot. Being able to receive feedback, not react, sit with it and work through it, because you can have the same reality from different perspectives. For example, we're both Oregon Duck fans, and if we're watching the Ducks play Michigan, we're going to watch the same game, but maybe have different perspectives, because my son was saved by University of Michigan, but our father-in-law, Dave, went to the Ducks. So depending on where your perspective's from, the same game, but people would describe it completely differently.
Absolutely. I may show up feeling like I was a certain way with my wife or with a colleague, and they may experience that interaction completely different based on where they're coming from. So hearing that constructive criticism is powerful. So you went from that, and some people may be old enough to remember Carlton Sheets was the infomercial guy, the late night guy when you couldn't sleep or were just procrastinating something you needed to be doing, talking about how you could own hundreds of properties, and you took the bait and jumped in. And and had a good, strong go at it in the beginning. Tell me about what happened with that and what you learned from that.
I'm not the sharpest pencil. I think I'm street smart, yet with Carlton Sheets, I'm like, if this guy wrote this book and this series on it, I'm not smarter than him, so I'll just do what he says. And like, I didn't overthink it. And that's where I say I'm not the sharpest pencil, is because if somebody's done what I want to do, who am I to change it up or think that I can find an easier way? Just go and do what he said to do. So I did it, and it went really well. One of the lessons in there was, once you've changed someone's diaper, it's tough to take advice from them. So my business partner was my dad, and we were at different stages in our life. And I hope this comes across not blaming or anything like that, just the reality of he was in a different stage of life and we had different ideas. When everything hit the fan, we had a commercial loan call due on us, and I had one path of action to take and he had another path of action to take. Ultimately, we went with his path, and knowing what I know now, my path would have absolutely gotten us out of it. In hindsight's 2020. Yet at the end of the day, I had a business partner. I couldn't make the decisions that I felt needed to be called on the field. Ultimately, we ended up getting a commercial loan call due, ended up filing bankruptcy because we had a little bit of a house of cards. But I think there's some things we could have done differently to not end up in that spot. And with that said, going through bankruptcy puts you in a whole different league moving forward, because I went bankrupt, lost everything. I had a son who almost died on the operating table. But
these are years apart though, correct?
Years apart. But
okay.
When you look financially and then someone that close, like, what are you going to do to me? Like, I've had bad days. So if I get rejected or somebody doesn't like me, I just go back to those days and think, man, I've had bad days and this isn't it. So let's just do what we need to do and suck it up.
Yeah, it changes the floor of what a bad day looks like.
Yeah, I was sitting across from a client. They're like, you don't know what it's like to lose a home. I said, you're right, because I lost 22 when I lost them. Right. I don't know what it's like to lose just one.
Yeah, you came through that. And you're a single guy at that point, correct?
I'm a single guy on my own. Sarah, my wife, she was a girlfriend at the time.
Okay.
And everything was falling apart.
So how did you navigate that within relationship of when you met? Were things going really well?
I think it was about our third or fourth date. I said, hey, I need to come clean. And I remember sitting on her guest bedroom bed and telling her that everything was falling apart. I said, if you don't want to be with me because everything's falling apart, I get it. And she said, if you think I'm with you because of your money, you don't know me. And that's when I knew I found a good one. And I think it was just having someone that believed in me and was willing to walk alongside me. It was perfect timing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was tough going through it because everybody was doing really well and my world was falling apart. And it was 4 or 5 years later when 2008 hit. And so I was already pretty battle worn by the time that came.
You were still in the real estate world, correct?
Correct. I was a lender.
Okay.
And then when our Uncle Alex died by suicide was the day I decided to get into real estate. And Sarah's dad died by suicide. So imagine making a major life decision and your wife just lost her uncle, the same disease that her dad died by.
Yeah.
My first listing was my uncle had died by suicide. So it was being thrown right into the fire when I went from lending to real estate. Some would say it was the worst time to get started. I'd say it's the best time, because when markets are tough, there's an advantage for those that are willing to double down and work hard and not hang on to what was. And we're going through that right now in the real estate industry, where people are like, oh, it's different. It's going to be tough times. And I'm thinking skill set matters again. You know, I don't wish for tough times, but when tough times come, there's opportunity. And more millionaires are made during tough times than the good times.
Yeah, absolutely. So you then move on from that and then jump into not just real estate, but real estate coaching.
What I realized was the math didn't work for me to make the money that I wanted to make selling real estate in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Our price point didn't allow me to make $500,000 a year because the number of homes I would have to sell just didn't add up. Because if you go to close all the things that you do, like I'd have to work 40 hours a day or build a team. So then I went and I took over a market center because I wanted to get it to the management side so that I could have more of a 9 to 5. And little did I know it wasn't like that. So I did that for 2 years. And then I was going to get back into production because, as you know, in management, you don't make what you make in sales. And so I went from not making enough money to making no money.
But you had the title.
Yeah.
And the headaches. So in that space between, there was a driver. You mentioned the benchmark that you wanted to make at least a certain amount.
Yep.
And Charlie, as I understand it, is part of the driver for that. So you had your oldest child, then Charlie comes along, and tell us what happened when Charlie was born.
Well, the reality was I had to make a choice every day of going to University of Michigan, which was an hour and a half away, or go and work that day. And I didn't have the luxury of of just going to the University of Michigan every day because we still had bills that were coming in. And after the first 2 weeks of people recognizing that Charlie was sick, their lives went on. And
Yes.
so the reality was they still wanted to sell their house and they were understanding, but they still had things they had to do. And it was at that moment I drew a line in the sand and I said, the next time I get punched in the jaw, I'm not going to have to worry about money. And our father-in-law, when he went into hospice, I essentially cut my work hours back to next to nothing and helped him transition. In the July, when he really went into full-blown hospice, we still made $70,000 that month. I think I worked 7 hours. And it was because Charlie sparked, I wasn't in a place to take care of my family financially when I needed to. So what I did was I've been through 400 or 500 books since then. I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on courses and coaches. Whenever it started getting easy, rather than peak, I would go to the next mountain. I would go backwards rather than get comfortable. Where most people, what they do is they get to a spot and they get comfortable, and then that's where they peak.
Isn't it interesting how cheaply most of our motivation can be bought? Just the slightest taste of reward and we let off the gas and coast. If we just realized we weren't even close to the peak of what we could have achieved was so much higher, but we just got the slightest taste out of the valley and we called it good.
Well, and I think you have to be real clear on what you want, and then you have to recognize or acknowledge what it takes to get there. So for example, Sarah and I have a number where we got to make blank amount every year. As long as we can do everything that we want to do. So anything above that, we'll choose a better life or long-term money or, more recurring money. So it becomes a math equation. I think what too many people do is their lifestyle ends up increasing and then they got to keep up with the Joneses. And so I think when you know what you want and know what you need, it allows you to make different decisions.
Which are two different things, as we all know, what we need and what we want. The wants are a cruel master. They're never satisfied. So it's deciding what we actually need. And then what are the extras that, all right, I can live with that. And it's not going to torpedo the whole ship here.
100% agree with that.
So you fix this with changing your job structure, your income, all of that. You've got some freedom and some flexibility, but then you find yourself drawn into another situation where for one of the biggest real estate outfits in the world, you are one of their big coaches. And you find, as you mentioned earlier, this has you on hundreds of flights a year. And it turns on its head this thing that started out from a good place of wanting to provide, wanting to be there, to where now it sounds like you're not even home most of the time.
Yeah, and it was a calculated decision. And we knew that in order to get to where I wanted to go, we had to go backwards. And I remember the day that I decided to get off the road. We had just got done building our house. Sarah called me and she said that she got our oldest deodorant. And maybe I'm chauvinistic, but that's something I thought as a dad I wanted to do. Sure. And I said, I'm done. And I remember at the time she goes, done with what? And she's like, done with us? Because I'm a rock star on the road. I mean, an affair could have happened very easily. I mean, half of our coaches ended up having affairs because you go on the road, you're almost worshipped. And then you come home after being gone for 5 days and your wife's been with 3 toddlers and she's like, here you go. And it was tough. And so when I realized that I didn't want to miss the rest of their thing, I decided to just stop. And we went through what's the worst that could happen. We said we might need to sell our dream home and move in with her mom and stepdad. And the reality was, that wouldn't have been a bad thing. Now that Dave's left this earth, that extra time with him wouldn't have been all bad. And so when I looked at the worst case scenario of we had to downsize, we're going to be okay, but I'm not willing to give up those years. And so now I take my kids to school. I've been present at pretty much everything.
So tell me what that's like when you come home. Sarah's throwing up the white flag because she's worn out, understandably. For people that do travel a lot, how did you navigate that? Because there was a time where you had to work through that, keep your integrity. What were some of the things that you used to stay true to your values during that time?
I think just acknowledging the reality and looking through different perspectives and then deciding what I wanted to live with core values and standards. And my wife and family was important to me. So I just put up big filters to make sure I was never in a spot where I could make a bad decision, because I know a lot of people that I care about and I have high respect for that have had affairs. And you and I know some of them that we won't mention their names. And I just didn't want to be one of them. So how I handled it was I got real clear on what I wanted, what I didn't want, what I was susceptible to. And I don't want to paint this picture as when I came home, I was awesome. Frankly, if Sarah told the perspective, I probably was average at best, but we made it through it. Don't judge your life by a season. All you got to do is survive. And I have a saying, my mom got it for me, but did you die?
Right.
Like, there were some tough years, but now I look 20 years later, it went by like that.
Yeah.
So sometimes you just got to survive and figure out how to get to the next hour, or the next day, or the next month, and know you'll figure out the rest of it when you get there. But until then, just survive.
Within that surviving, you mentioned something that I've heard you talk about a number of times, core values and the standards. Talk about that a little bit and how you help people set up core values, standards, kind of an internal personal operating procedure for people to help keep them on the path of what they're trying to either overcome or simply achieve.
Great question. So on my 37th birthday, I gave myself a gift of never lying again. Like, I don't even tell what little white lies. And it's led to some pretty difficult conversations. So, I'm 47 now, so I've had 10 years of not telling any lies or any white lies, or even if I think somebody's believing something that's not true, I'll make sure that they do. And it's just made life a lot easier. And when you start to get outcomes that you don't desire, anytime I get an outcome that I don't desire, I go back and I put a new standard in place. So if, for example, if I have somebody that shows up late for a call, which by the way, you were on time and I was on time, what I do is I set better expectations where if somebody's late, they get 3 strikes with me. So most relationships know with me, they get 3 strikes. And if they have 3 strikes, they're out. And I've had to loosen up my standards a little bit now that we're in a different phase. But when we were in phase 1 income, I didn't have the margins to be having people mess with my time or mess with anything. So I had standards around relationships. If you didn't have a good marriage, I probably wasn't getting too close to you because I didn't want you to be the influence on me. So, one of my standards, this might sound crazy. If you're in my inner circle, we share our P&Ls, our balance sheets, so that we can make sure we're trending in the right direction. We're being good stewards of money, because too many people in my world, they try to out earn stupid. They made a ton of money, but they're broke.
It also harkens back to what we talked about early on, is the accountability, because we're all really good at making excuses for why things look the way they look. And when you've got somebody else looking over your shoulder at either your P&L or, an accountability partner in your personal life, how you're showing up, it changes things. And the excuses can quickly fall away. As you talked about pointing out, when someone is being misled or things are being misrepresented, you only have to be an accountability partner with someone for so long to start picking up their tells and know whether they're full of it and start calling that out. And so accountability is key in all of that. As you move forward from that, you launched more into coaching. You're not on board with this major organization. You're not really all that much selling houses directly, but you're helping other people who have become overwhelmed by either lack of success or trying to chase too much success ineffectively, become more effective in their pursuits. What are some of the common themes that you see as you work with people that they are struggling to overcome to achieve success and to have what you call, and you've got a sign behind you, their net life?
Most people's math doesn't work. I'm a sports guy, so we had a scoreboard and we knew when the game started, when it ended. Most people don't know their key productivity metrics. What I help people do is get real clear on where they're at, where they want to go, and what their key metrics are. And then we need to make sure that they're committed, not interested. And then we need to make sure that they're consistent. And then, do we have a long enough runway in order to take off? But what I find is most people are interested, they're not committed. So they start doing the work. It's like, hey, I went to the gym in January, and come next January, I only went for 30 days, but I worked out hard. But it was more important that you just worked out consistently.
Okay. One of the things that you talk about is your 36 to life. And so tell me what that means. I know it's primarily for people in real estate, but as I've heard you talk about it, it has clear implications for other people in all facets of life.
We'll back up just a little bit for context. At my old company, the founder wrote a book that was awesome, and it was all about how you build this big real estate team. I went to go and implement it and watched and helped others implement it, but it was always like a Frankenstein project where nobody actually made it work. And if they did make it work, the reality of from where they started, where they were, there was a lot easier way. And what that way was for me was 36 to life, where bigger isn't always better. And 36 to life came from doing 3 deals a month in the real estate world. You can do that as a solo agent, no admin, and it helps you from getting into destructive abundance. And I think that's where most people find themselves in trouble, is when they get in destructive abundance, they start listening to the press and they might be making more money, but they're not netting more money. And so 36 to life was, how do we figure out the most efficient way to do what we want to do without getting into destructive abundance? And that's where 36 to life was born for those of us that didn't need to be up on stage as the greatest agent. They'd rather be the greatest dad or greatest husband or greatest community person than winning awards. But our industry doesn't necessarily reward ordinary things that are extraordinary.
Yeah, it often is about the flashy, as it is in most industries. Whose name's going to be most impressive on the marquee, but when instead maybe the guy on the corkboard at home that's getting it done.
Now, here's one thing I don't necessarily like about society, but we do have to acknowledge. For example, if let's say you, me, and Tony Robbins were all going to speak on something, Tony, because of his track record and how everybody knows him, is going to have more credibility, right?
Yeah.
So I think there is part of where you got to play the game, because I think it helps with the trust factor and it helps with the credibility. And the more people believe in it, the more that they're more likely to take action. But there's a fine line between credibility and fraud. I coached with a guy who led me to believe a certain thing, only to find out that he was $4 million in IRS debt when he was coaching me. And frankly, based on what he was coaching me on, I think that would have been an important part to know. Not if I would have known, it's not that I wouldn't have coached with him, but it would have led to a lot different credibility.
Now you have in context.
Yeah. And I learned a bunch of things from that particular coach. Yet when we go along, when we experience things out of others that we don't like, we need to make sure we hold ourselves accountable to that higher standard to make sure that we're not doing it. So wisdom I once heard was learning through other people's mistakes or successes, not having to learn all the lessons yourself.
Those were great points, because to your point, yes, Tony Robbins absolutely is going to get center stage, main stage at that event. He's earned it. But I think in totality, you've got to look at his life. What sacrifices has he made? What moves, what choices has he made to get to that point? And back to your point of having our standards that we don't waver on, we adhere to at all costs. Do our standards conform to what it takes to achieve that level? Or do we have other priorities that we espouse more highly? And so therefore, the sacrifices that it took to get to that point of quote unquote credibility, maybe those are some corners we're not willing to cut. Maybe there's some relationships in there that we prize more highly.
I think that needs to be talked about more in our world is, are you willing to give up or sacrifice what those people sacrificed? And a lot of times they're not letting you know all that went on in order to get there. One of my triggers is they're like, yeah, but you're Hank, because people see where I am today and they're like, well, but I would much rather have them say, yeah, but I'm not willing to be consistent like you, Hank. I'm not willing to continue doing within while doing without, working 20-hour days to be where you're at. So I'm going to make it seem as if you got some sort of superpower, which I don't. I just work hard and I'm willing to hit my head against the wall until I break through it.
Yeah. And another thread that's come up numerous times in the conversation has been the consistency. And if you're nothing, you're consistent. That's who I've known you to be. And so the phrase of, champions are made in the dark comes to mind as you were just saying that everybody wants to be the Hank today, but nobody wanted to be the Hank in 2009 who was, how am I going to make ends meet while being there for my family, while doing these different things that I prioritized? Those are dark times, as those of us who have been through deep valleys with family struggles and challenges like that. It's a different place than most of us have been until you get to that point and you've got to make some hard choices. And so everybody wants their name on the marquee, but nobody wants to be in the gym in the middle of the night when no one else is there.
And a lot of that happened. I literally, for probably 15 to 20 years, a 12-hour day was a light day for me, working wise.
Sure.
Sleep was 3 to 4 hours a night because, I'd sleep and then I'd go to bed after everyone and I'd get up before everyone. I'm not suggesting that I'm sure it took years off my life, but when you put a lot more hours in, you can have a lot more success.
Right. So as you've navigated through all of these changes, as you've made some pretty big career leaps, in all honesty, though Sarah probably understood why you wanted to leave the road show At the same time, there, I imagine, was on her part a bit of, you know, oh no, there was, at least there was some security in this. What's going to happen here? I think what can often happen with sometimes us dreamers, entrepreneurs, things like that, is we get an idea in our head and we might be willing to do the work in the dark, but we, in order to maintain healthy relationships, have to find effective ways to get everyone on board or still listen to their needs, not neglect their needs, and have
Right.
them be on the journey with us. Because when you're married, when you're in a relationship, you're not a solopreneur. It's a whole house deal. How did you pull Sarah in or talk with her, relate with her to get her on board with what you were wanting to do?
I'm going to give my perspective to the best that I believe is the truth. Sarah was raised by a single mom whose dad died by suicide when she was 6, meaning she was 6 years old when her dad died by suicide. So money and struggle wasn't new to her. The reality is Sarah believed in me, even probably when she shouldn't. And we were both prepared to go through some tough times, because really that's all we've known is tough times. And let's look at the reality. We weren't going to be homeless. There's plenty of people that would take us in. She knew that we were both competent and willing to work hard. And so many people think that, life should be happy little high notes, but imagine going to a symphony that only had happy, high little high notes, if you get what I'm trying to say. You need the ups and the downs. And so the nice thing was, Sarah was awesome. When I talk about my success, it's more our success. So it really wasn't much to get her on board, because we spoke together. It wasn't like, hey, here's what I'm doing. We talked about the pros and cons. When it got tough, we bailed together, meaning we bailed the water together. It wasn't one saying, I told you so.
Yeah. I think visionaries can get this so wrong so often. Is it wasn't a dictate, it was a discussion. What does this look like? And you even mentioned that earlier. What's the worst that can happen was a conversation the two of you had.
So Colby, here's the thing though, like on the last time that I did it in 2016, I've documented every hour that I've worked. So, I mean, if I was working, I owed it to my family to show up and put those hours in. And I told myself, if I wasn't going to go and do the work, and if I made it a week where I didn't do that, I was going to go get a job. And so my level of accountability, doing the work was at such a high level that she saw that, where when somebody's doing the work, it's tough to not cheer them on. Sometimes she's like, can we really pull this off? And that's where those little wins come in, that first client, or, that first month where you're not going into savings. And those little wins make a big difference.
Tracking every hour mentions another thing that I think is a useful tool for so many people to take a look at. And you often challenge people, show me your calendar and I'll show you your priorities.
100%, in your bank account too. So many people, they don't know where they're at. They don't know their budget. They don't know their math on where they want to go. They don't know where they're spending their time. So they're just guessing. Imagine a football team that doesn't know what part of the season they're in, what quarter they're in, what the score is. Does this game matter on them making the playoffs, or is this the last play to win the Super Bowl? And if you don't know that stuff, you can't make good decisions. And what Sarah and I realized was, we're playing a longer game here.
Yeah.
We're playing results that are 5, 10, 15, 20 years out. And if we have to embrace the suck now, we'd much rather do that than end up being 55 and miserable, or 57, because I'm looking 10 years out and we're about to start a new venture. That's probably going to take 5 to 10 years to play out.
Yeah.
But when you're not worried about cash flow, so let me give one tactical formula real quick. First, you got to decide if you have an income problem. I stopped selling real estate because I had an income problem, because I couldn't make the money that I wanted to make. Then you got to solve your cash flow problem. So you're not thinking in 30, 60, 90-day increments. You're looking at 12, 24, 36-month increments. Then what you get to do is you get to referee your life: relationships, energy, finances. Take care of your relationships, get the right people on your team, have great energy, and you don't have to worry about the finances because you're not stupid. And then you just rinse and repeat.
Yeah, that's good. And you mentioned a minute ago about shooting for the happiness, which I think so many people do. So instead of playing for the emotion, which is a thing that I think people often do, they play for the emotion of the moment. And let's be honest, in the world of smartphones and a la carte TV, everything else that people have out there, we're just absolute junkies for the quick hit of emotion. So instead of playing for emotion, play for the long-term game of contentment, of satisfaction, of stability in this day and age where if I don't get that attaboy every day at the office, boy, why am I even here? Which many years ago, I had a boss firmly but kindly remind the office as he waved a pay stub, here's why you're here. And if not for this, I don't think any of you would have come in today. So understanding the basic staples that we take for granted because we're looking for that peak of adrenaline, that's quick, and just like adrenaline fades quickly, so do those emotions. But building long-term on principles, standards, values with long-term game in mind.
100%. And a lot of times it's based on switch costs, right? So I talk a lot about money and it's pretty taboo, right? And some people are like, I wish you wouldn't talk about it. All you care about is money. I go, how long would you show up to your job if you don't get paid? And 9 times out of 10, they're like, well, they wouldn't. I go, I show up all the time and don't get paid. So who cares more about money, you or me?
Yeah.
And I look at money just as a tool. I mean, someone once said, I wish I could give credit to who it, if money can solve your problem, you don't have any problems. And if you look at most problems that people have, they can be solved by money. So go figure out the money game and do the work to do it. And you watch all the other problems that you have. Not having to worry about money when our father-in-law Dave was passing was the greatest gift I've given myself, because I didn't have to worry about money. I could grieve. I could be by his side. I could do the things that didn't make sense, buy his lawnmower from him so I could mow his lawn. That literally happened. And yet, I could be there and just be a human being for him and not have to worry about putting my family in harm's way where, I made that decision.
That's good. So as we wrap up here, what are some of the things that you would suggest people prioritize and look at as they structure out to overcome either a momentary challenge or, what some are saying, hey, things are going to get a little tighter yet financially, whether it be inflation or whatever else in the U.S. specifically over the next year or two. What are some key points that you would have people implement in their lives to navigate this season?
Well, it's tough to give prescription without a proper diagnosis, because if I give too much prescription here, it could be from the wrong perspective. So we're going to focus on that word perspective. I watch a lot of movies on World War II or Vietnam or the Holocaust, and I think to myself, those were tough times. I mean, I look at everybody right now. People have gotten so soft where it's like, good God, we're in the greatest time ever to live. And so I would just tell people, if you think you're in a tough spot, go get some perspective where you're grateful. And I remember going into the hospital at U of M going, God, why me? And I was pretty upset. And then when I left and I saw the people that didn't leave with their children, I thought, why me? Meaning, why am I the lucky one? Because another family was living with no support system, and they still weren't coming home with their kid. They were like 19 years old. And I'm thinking to myself, I almost had like a survivor's guilt. So, I think a lot of people just need to get some perspective and stop thinking, woe is me. Oh, it's so tough. We have it better off than almost every single person on the planet in 1910.
Yeah.
Quit being so soft.
Yeah. That's good. Our youngest son is really into airplanes, and that has led into this fascination with World War II. And he and I are working through tons of World War II documentaries, movies based on actual stories and things like that. And over, the resounding theme that we have as we sit and watch these things together is just awe and amazement of the sacrifices that the men and women made for those efforts to preserve life at all, much less way of life.
Here's what I do with a lot of my clients. When they're whining, I'll go tell 10 of your clients what you're whining about, how much money you make and how much you have to show up. And they're embarrassed, because you don't have to go very far for you to go whine to someone that has it 10 times worse than you.
Absolutely.
And you'd feel like a complete piece of work.
Yeah. So where's the best place for people to follow you, and what's your handle?
I'll post Facebook for kind of the life coaching type stuff.
Right on. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Hank, and appreciate all your wisdom and insight.